Hi everybody. I've been asked to give you an update today on a number of the Q&As that are coming out of the woodwork now on the whole DCMS return to play process. We've been inundated with questions, which is fantastic. Thank you for sharing them with us. There's a lot of emerging trends and themes here. We were going to do a full Q&A session here and actually have the questions fielded as they come in. But realistically, I think with the depth you're going to need on some of these questions and answers here, it's easily going to be a conference rather than a Q&A sort of feel vlog video thing. So we're going to try and field some of the questions in text format if we think we can get a fairly decent answer to it online. And I'm going to try and touch on some of these questions that are coming in here. And I've got a screen just off the camera here, which is what I'm looking at, not looking at the feet. I'm going to try and field some of these questions as and when they come up and come in. But I'm going to try and do it in a way which is joined up and makes sense, because what we want you to be able to do is clock off for the bank holiday weekend feeling at least that you understand what's going on, at least with your eyes wide open to the threat or the problems or whatever might be going on behind the scenes. And we want to try and clear up some of the confusion, because everybody right now is understandably very angry, very confused by what they can and can't do. And naturally the circus show that is this independent martial arts sector, which is really, really good in some sections and with some organisations, but is not quite so good in other areas. What it's done is open up this whole, well, Pandora's box has just opened, and out comes all the confusion and misstatements and so on and so forth. And the first question on the board here is what's just happened this week? What's going on with the DCMS? I'm not going to go right from the start. I think it's covered on the website and most of you will be aware of it already, but effectively the sudden change in guidance last week that now requires a return to play policy, which I'll refer to as an RTP for the rest of this so we're not stretching out a massive word for the next 20 minutes. The return to play policies are now required for each and every sport before they can resume some of the latter phases of training, so contact training. So for martial arts, what that means is before you can move to phase 1 and 2 in the combat sports framework, which permits things like pad work, contact training, grappling, etc., it's got to have been approved by the DCMS. Now the DCMS is the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. It's headed up by Oliver Dowden. It's the government agency, the government department that handles sport, amongst other things. And Sport England are obviously working with the DCMS here to look at these RTP policies and sort of work out who they're going to represent and what goes through. And the next question here is, does this mean that we can all go back to contact training on the 12th of April? And the straightforward answer is no. We've got a real problem here, because we're going to see a huge void in what can and can't happen, conflated by the problem that some organisations are just making up as they go along and some clubs don't care. Effectively, by the letter, and we've had this confirmed today from Sport England, who are now in contact with us, I'm pleased to say, from the 12th of April, when indoor training for children is permitted and independence or individual indoor gym use for adults is also permitted, if all continues as it is right now, unless there is an approved return to play policy, and I'm not talking about approved by an association or by the board, has to be approved by the government specifically. The DCMS itself must approve it. It has to be on the website with the list of approved NGBs and organisations. Unless it's on that website, unless it's been actually looked at by the government itself and approved, it doesn't count for anything. Which means if you are not covered by an RTP policy specific to your style, you will remain at phase 0 training, and that is socially distanced non-contact training, as we've been doing for the last year pretty much. Phase 1 and phase 2 covers extra privileges, if you like. It shouldn't be a privilege, it should be the right of us all to practice these things, but I'll use the word privilege in terms of the way the rules work. And that's for things like pad work, contact training, grappling, etc. And the next question here is someone asking, saying they do ARNIS, so Filipino martial arts, and they're asking if the plans are approved, can they go back to training in ARNIS, for example, if a kickboxing plan is approved? And the answer is, we don't know yet. We haven't had any clarity around this point. It's an obviously basic detail which should have been answered by now but hasn't. The DCMS and Sport England seem to have gone to sleep on this matter, because it's been left until literally the 11th hour. And now they're obviously saying they've been deluged by inquiries and responses and policy submissions, etc. I mean, the obvious thought would be, well, what else did you think was going to happen when you effectively at the last minute say, actually, we're not looking at a phased unilateral lockdown easing. We're going to suddenly start cherry picking organisations and groups that can go back to certain privileged contact training and holding everybody back on social distance training. A big bugbear, and I can see it coming up there actually, is why are there separate RTP policies, and why can there not be a universal framework for the return of martial arts? It's something we have been red with anger over for the last week or so. The concept makes sense. So the concept would be, normally if you take a sport outside of martial arts, there is normally one governing body, an NGB, that oversees that whole sport. The idea is the NGB goes to Sporting or the DCMS and says, here's our return to play policy. It sets out how we safely get back to whatever sport we're doing. And this is the process everyone's going to follow in the organisation to make sure it's safe. It's approved by government. Sport continues. Brilliant. Crack on. With martial arts, we all know it doesn't work like that. There are at least 180 associations and supporting bodies and NGBs, some self-appointed, some sporting and recognised across the martial arts sector. And we've got over 100 disciplines of martial arts in action as well. So it's a very, very patchwork, very complicated structure. What the DCMS are doing, and it makes sense if in black and white on paper, if you don't know the way the martial arts world works, they're trying to approve one policy, and they will only approve one policy per sport. What this means is BMABA can't submit and have approved a return to play policy for Taekwondo if, for example, an NGB like the BTC submit and have theirs approved instead. Only one policy per sport can be approved. And what this is going to obviously do is open up a huge vacuum in clubs that can and clubs that can't. You're going to have, some karate clubs, for example, up the road you can do contact training and pad work, and the club down the road that's just as comparably qualified and capable and safe, if not more so, won't be able to do anything. They'll be stuck on phase 0 social distance training. Understandably, this is creating a real anxiety amongst clubs and instructors, because obviously it's a real risk you'll lose clubs and students, and it's going to make the easing of the lockdown much more difficult when you've got a club down the road advertising full contact training and you're still stuck doing social distance, non-contact training yourself. We've tried to labour this point because it's quite an obvious one as we see it. And what it's doing is opening up a huge commercial advantage for associations, some of which have done very little work for the last year for the members, over clubs and associations that have worked very, very hard to do things safely and right for the last year. Until this point, what's been happening is the DCMS have set the boundaries, if you like, of regulation as to what you can and can't do. And it's then been legally upon the associations to represent and share that guidance with the members appropriately, and obviously for you guys and girls to actually deploy that to your clubs and your students. And that's worked quite well. This sudden change in tact is a tightening of those restrictions. So to us, it feels like a slap in the face. It feels like the last year of everyone working so hard to follow the guidance and keep adapting to the guidance and changing it. Bearing in mind some clubs have been just doing whatever they feel like it, and some associations have been trying to work with loopholes the whole way through this. To have been labouring the safe route through and the approved route through the whole way through this pandemic, and to now at the 11th hour, literally days before the return of outdoor training, have it taken away and be told, actually, you've got to run with an approved policy only, and most of you are going to miss the boat on that, is disgusting. It's a gross misunderstanding of the way the market works, and it's a huge devaluation of the brilliant work our clubs do. All of you out there, you know what you do. Whether you're in one of the more mainstream styles like karate, taekwondo, kickboxing, or one of the more specialist styles like HEMA or Arnis or ninjutsu or anything else out there, the sporting styles, mixed martial arts, Muay Thai, the list is endless. And what you do is make a huge, tangible difference to the social, mental and physical well-being of those in your community. And we are appalled by the fact that that has been completely neglected. Children who've been cooped up for a year now are going to be denied access to safe contact training, power, whatever it might be within clubs that aren't going to be able to go back to training at all, or will fail over this next 2 or 3 week period or 2 or 3 month period because the guidance hasn't been looked at properly. And we've been knocking on their door for the last, I don't know how many months trying to get this signed off and approved. There's been plenty of time to do this better. So we're very, very deeply frustrated by the way this has been handled. And we will be asking questions when the dust settles, when the time is right. But obviously for now, our primary focus is just getting as many clubs back as we can and making sure the confusion's sort of answered. So the next question here is, they've seen, there's actually 4 in that category straight away, have seen NGBs issuing return to play policies online or guidance as to what you can and can't do. And they're asking how they had it approved and we haven't. The truth is, as of the moment, right now, nobody's had their policies approved. Everything is pending, everything is tentative, everything is with the DCMS, who have been deluged, obviously, because they've moved the goalpost at the 11th hour, awaiting sign-off. Now, with little doubt, some of the major NGBs will have their policies ushered through or will find their policies approved first. That seems fairly logical, if not, a certainty. But we've seen a number of organisations that are not going to be the NGB. They're already not the NGB, or they're not going to be offered NGB status. They're already telling their members they can access their return to play policy. And when we've drilled down on 2 or 3 of those organisations, we've been told things like, well, the guidance says it has to have a policy approved by the NGB for that sport. And with the NGB, and that's approved by us and off you go. The guidance is crystal clear. It's got to be approved by government. It can't be just approved arbitrarily by Anybody who fancies it within the organisation, it has to be approved by the DCMS. Only one RTP per sport will be approved. Until it's been approved by the DCMS, it's worthless. So to all those clubs out there right now, trying to understand how so many other organisations are claiming they're back on the mats with all sorts of privileges from the 12th of April right now, sit tight. We are waiting for the DCMS to give us a formal update. We think it's coming on the 6th of April, which is just way too late when you're 12th of April is the return date. But don't be discouraged. We know, and this next post actually here, what about the clubs that aren't going to bother following these rules? This is exactly it, isn't it? Because we're going to end up in a situation, this patchwork situation, where some clubs can go back in some styles, some clubs can't go back in other styles. And even within those styles, you're going to find some associations that can give access to the RTP, others that can't. There's no way an enforcement officer is going to be able to discern, as far as we can see it, what clubs can and can't legitimately teach. So, understandably, again, good clubs that have done the right thing and followed the guidance to the letter are going to be losing out now to clubs that don't care and are just going to use this as a sort of, smoke screen to go back and train anyway and say, well, to hell with it, we're going to crack on and see who finds out. And this is a real problem. We're seeing the same in the association market. Tin pot organisations that are approving all sorts of crazy measures themselves. Will they be caught out? Probably not. It doesn't negate the fact that it's not legal, and the right thing to do, the professional thing to do, is to follow the guidance. Personally, I completely understand why clubs are going to be doing whatever they can to survive. And on a personal note, as an instructor, I would be very, very desperate to do almost anything to join almost anybody who could promise me that return to play. So, the underlying thing here is if it smells or looks too good, it probably is. Make sure an organisation promising a return to play policy has actually had it confirmed by the DCMS and that it's actually been confirmed, not just sent off to them, but actually confirmed by them before you bank on it. Okay, so the next question is, okay, that's a good question. So where are BMBA in the return to play policy process? What have we got to prove? What's signed off, etc.? Like everybody else at the moment, officially nothing's been signed off. We previously submitted, but we've resubmitted our mixed martial arts return to play policy. We have to focus on one sport only, which is incredibly hard to do when you represent 112 disciplines. So we focus on MMA because we think that's going to give clubs the best flexibility to get back to the broadest range of activities as possible. Things like grappling, striking, stand-up fighting, etc. A whole host of clubs can fit under that umbrella legitimately and without bending the rules, because mixed martial arts is a very broad spectrum of cover. We don't know yet if DCMS or Sport England will work with it. We know they've got it. We've been in touch with Sport England today, who have confirmed it's all in motion. It's been approved. Well, in approval, not that it's been approved, but it's in the approval process. That doesn't mean it's going to get approved. We might find they go with another association instead, or that they don't want to sign off and make. Who knows? It's sort of finger in the air stuff at the moment. What we did have last night, which is really positive news, is approval to be a signatory on the England Kickboxing RTP policy, which means we've now been approved for using that RTP policy for kickboxing alongside the likes of WACO, the ISK and the BKC. So and I'd like to cautiously think when, but if that policy is approved, we will then be able to run with kickboxing on phase 1 and 2, which will permit contact training. The next question on the board feeds directly into this point. I can see it here. What's the difference between kickboxing being signed off and karate and taekwondo? It's all sort of fairly similar. The processes are the same. And this is the disparity. This is the issue here. So many clubs will lose out on a technicality of what style they're classed to be. We know the framework, and as Pete said there, no question there, why is there not just one framework? That is the question, isn't it? There should clearly be one return to play policy per association, if not just overall. But the powers that be, they decided that's too easy, or too straightforward, so they want it individually, style by style, sport by sport. If kickboxing is approved, and there's a likelihood that will be approved before mixed martial arts is approved for us, if we even get approval for MMA, we will try and be as liberal as we can without breaching the legitimacy in the way we license styles, to try and give temporary access to that classification for clubs and styles that are neighbours to it. So if we have clubs, for example, that are classed as perhaps a taekwondo club, but actually the instructor's qualified in kickboxing as well, we can make temporary switches to classifications of discipline to try and help as many clubs as possible access this guidance as safely as we can. Obviously, what we can't do is just arbitrarily reassign everyone as a kickboxer for 3 months. We just can't do it. As much as we'd love to, it's not legal, it's not right, we can't do it. But if that guidance is signed off, we'll work with as many clubs as we can, as quickly as we can, to help clubs that have some aspect of freestyle kickboxing or some legitimate reference to kickboxing to get onto that return to play policy as fast as we can. And obviously, if mixed martial arts gets the approval, then we can move much faster across a wider style base because it's a much broader classification. But, as with everything right now, we're also in the dark, and we're not the only ones. We know organisations of substantial and significant presence in our martial arts sector, but also in the wider sports sector that are also in the dark in this process. So, you're not being shut out just because you're an independent club. There are NGBs that are being shut out here as well. So it's a very fluid situation. Another question is, where does self-defense fit into this mix? That is a very good question. One we've asked several times, but we haven't got a response for. Self-defense doesn't seem to be classed as a combat sport, so trying to classify where that sits is very hard to do. The best bet we have right now is if you're a self-defense instructor that you start trying to marry up your return to play against that of fitness training, PTs, personal trainers, etc. Because it seems that's most likely going to be the closest link you're going to get to guidance to follow. You're going to have to wait until there's something official on that line, I think, unfortunately, because at the moment, whether they decide self-defense classes as a combat sport, I think probably not. But there's nothing specific that we can see that's going to actually help you work out what you can and can't do. So unfortunately, if you're in self-defense, sit tight with us. We'll come back to you as soon as we can. The next one here, it's coming back to the question, why are there separate, and this is off the back of what I just said then, why are there separate return to play policies? Why can't there just be a single association-wide policy? And the truth is, that's exactly what we think there should be. One universal policy set by the DCMS that every martial arts association and club should be following, and that would alleviate this situation we're going to find ourselves in, where some clubs are doing it right and sitting still on phase 0. Some clubs are running away and doing whatever they fancy because there's cover from an association or an NGB that isn't an NGB, that claims to have a return to play policy that isn't been approved, telling them they can do something they can't do, at the expense of the club down the road who's just done it properly for the last year, losing out. It is just so appallingly, disproportionately stacked against those who have done it right and are following the rules. It disgusts me. It absolutely infuriates me. This is just a shambolic exit from lockdown. And so many clubs are going to miss out. I have to be honest about that. So many clubs are going to miss out on the chance to go back to conduct training when clubs on the road are doing exactly that, purely based on the politics of who they're registered with or who's approved and so on and so forth. The only silver lining I can give you right now is that this is only hopefully going to be for a very short period of time. 12th of April earliest, depending on what's approved, is going to be the date at which most of these privileges are going to come into play if policies are approved at that point. And even at that point, we're only talking really a couple of months before all other clubs and other styles should be able to start returning to contact training as well if the June return date in England works as planned. Doesn't mean we're not really wound up about this process. Doesn't mean we're not going to keep pounding the drum and applying for all 70 return to play policies if we have to until we have confirmation they're not going to work with it. But there is huge disparity at the moment. So if you are, for example, a kickboxing club that also practice jiu-jitsu, we could find yourself in a position where the kickboxing is permitted, jiu-jitsu is not. You can have clubs that do everything but kickboxing, so mixed martial arts, Thai boxing, for example. Can you classify as kickboxing? Who knows? Can you go back to mixed martial arts? No. Can you go back to kickboxing? Yes, you can. What's the difference? Who knows? It's a mystery to us as much as it is to you. So, there should be one policy, clearly. They deemed it not to be the sensible option for some reason, so we'll see how that one works. The list here is going on. I'm going to defer some of these to our actual written responses because the themes are similar. An interesting one that I'm reading on the board here coming in from another instructors here, 7 people at the moment, in North Lincolnshire. The council are saying classes can't resume until the 19th of April. Classing it as dance and gymnastics, not true. Combat Sports Framework has now pulled martial arts out into the spotlight. That's good and bad, but it means we have got specific guidance for martial arts. It's very clearly defined as martial arts now. We're not arbitrarily banded onto fitness like we were last year. 12th of April remains the date at the moment for indoor training for children, even on phase 0. So even if you don't have access to a style approved with the return to play policy, you can still return phase 0, social distance contact training, zero contact training, so social distance, zero contact training on the 12th of April if all remains well for children indoors. 17th of May is indoor for adults as well. You can teach outdoors in the interim. If you are in North Lincolnshire, the council actually, from what I can see on the board here, there's a couple more people coming on for that one. I think they've got that wrong. I think we can challenge that. So if you are in North Lincolnshire and you're affected by that problem with the council, drop us a line. We're going to try and put together a representation and we'll go to them and try and see if we can clear that up, because I think they need to look at the rules again, because I think they've got that grossly wrong. So yeah, if you're affected by that question, message us, contact us, get in touch, and we'll try and represent that for you. Again, is it just kickboxing? It's going to be approved. It hasn't been approved yet. If it's approved, we don't know if it's going to be kickboxing or if we can apply it to other styles. We are literally in the dark on this. They've blindsided us. So all 30,000 of our members are sat here, what are we on the 1st of April, 12 days away from launch, waiting for information. That's made worse by the fact that, like as I said previously, some NGBs, the unscrupulous ones that just want to make a couple of quid, are just shouting whatever they fancy shouting to claw up members. It is shambolic. I think you can tell your members, though, that you're working on it, we're working on it. There will be some form of training available. It may or may not be contact training at this moment, but we're not going to know until really, I think, the 6th of April, which is way too close to the day, the 12th of April. But 6th of April, we're expecting the finer print and the details on this. Okay, next question here. Yep, what about Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland? Very good question. We're really disappointed to see Wales being held back on their release from lockdown. We know that there are all sorts of problems across the borders in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland that are different than that in England. And I'm always conscious that we are sometimes a bit England-centric and it's all a bit Sport England heavy. The main reason is because the engagement, the way we're moving out of lockdown, the different stages the devolved nations are at with England in the mix, mean we have to focus on each one in turn, and Sport England seem to be sucking us dry at the moment. Wales were very disappointed with the delayed exit from lockdown. We're working with the Welsh Sports Association, with whom we're a member, to try and press the government to give us more on this. It's ridiculous that children have missed out on so much and they still can't get back to fitness training. So we'll work with them on that. The hope, as we've seen it at the moment, is that because you're coming out of lockdown later, you'll come out of it faster. We will keep you posted. We are in contact and applying where relevant with all the devolved nations for the equivalent return to play sort of processes. So we will keep everyone in the devolved nations updated. And if for the next week or two you are a bit lost in the England-centric guidance, drop us a line and we'll clear up what's going on for you if it's relevant. And then finally hit about the insurance. So yeah, what happens to insurance? You are, if you're a member of us, you're insured for training online, whether it's live or pre-recorded. Outdoor training is insured, indoor training is insured. The key thing to remember here is in the event of a claim, you have to be following government guidance on what you can and can't do. So whilst it is all too tempting to run away and just do what you want to do right now for the next couple of months, because why shouldn't you if the club down the road is doing the same? And I really genuinely, passionately understand that emotional position you might well be at. In the event of a claim, the insurers will be looking to see if you've been following the guidance and if you're teaching appropriately. So do bear that in mind. I'm not going to go into the insurance here because it'll be another half an hour. So we'll make sure we cover that fully for you all before the 12th of April. There's no changes to policies on that respect. Another question, it's a very generous question here. How are the BMABA team coping and how's everyone been through this? And that's a really nice point someone's made there. And actually, I think last week when this whole return to play policy thing came to a pinnacle, it's probably the lowest I've ever been in a decade of doing this. And been previously a very stressful role in insurance in the city. So it's not like I've come from a purely sporting background. So I've never had a day like that. Genuinely, last week, I think it had somebody taking the keys off me on the way out the door. I could have quite easily walked away and never come back. I was so angry and so disappointed with the way we felt betrayed by the way independent martial arts has been undervalued and everything else. As a team, we've been working nearly 7 days a week now for the last how many months. We've had different access to different resources and staffing levels throughout the year. We've had so many moving goalposts and targets. We have so much exciting stuff, things like the app, which is now ready. But all these things are obviously pent up behind this wall of return to play and try not to get things lost in the noise. So we are all exhausted. I feel emotionally, mentally and somewhat physically drained from this year. I know, speaking to colleagues in other martial arts associations who run other organisations in the independent sector, they feel exactly the same. They've told me before, Christmas and other periods in the year, they felt close to the point of just saying, what's the point, throwing in the towel. And I think, but we are still going and we have a spring in our step because we know we're getting towards the end of this now. And I think for all of our clubs, everybody out there who's teaching, you've got to remember the difference you're making to the community you teach in. Martial arts is not just a sport. And this is the main frustration we have. Sport England, DCMS, whatever, councils, they fail to grasp the most basic principles of what it is we do. Every single instructor out there will make a tangible difference to children and adults, mental, physical and social well-being. And that is just the most incredible difference you can make. Martial arts is not just a sport. It has genuine ability to change lives. And I accept that sports more generally will change lives and has the ability to lift people out of poverty. But martial arts has a way of doing it in a way I don't personally believe other sports can do. I certainly was lifted out of poverty by martial arts as a child or as a teenager. It gave me the gateway to go on and do what I'm doing now, running this association from nothing. So martial arts teaches perseverance and discipline and respect, and it teaches resilience in literally by the bagful. So there is nothing like it. What you do in your community makes a huge difference to the lives of so many. And throughout this pandemic, we've been touched by the messages we've had from instructors and students telling us what martial arts means to them and the difference the things we've been doing have made to their clubs. And also from students telling us the difference their instructors have made. We've had students who have been at the point of depression and horrible anxiety lifted out of that by training in martial arts. We have people finding real fitness benefits, mostly physically, socially, mentally fitness. It just, the difference you're making is huge. You've done the worst of it now. Even if you fall off the grid in the return to play policy and you can't access phase 1 and phase 2, we are in the final phases of this now. And I think for all of you out there, you can be immensely proud of yourselves for making it this far. You have negotiated COVID in the dark, blindfolded, with your hands tied behind your back, with a brass cymbal banging behind your head for the last year. You have survived no regulation and guidance. You've made your way through a muddied market in which some organisations and clubs have been doing whatever they fancy, and you've been trying to hold that centre line because you know it's the right thing to do and because you're professional. You have shown resilience and discipline just by limitless bounds, and that is exactly the sort of thing we instill in our students when we teach martial arts. So you can go forth with your head held high. The next couple of months may be more of a fight than you thought they were going to be. You might be lucky and find a policy that represents you very well. We will back you, as we have done for the last year, all the way to the finish line. So until the last club gets onto the mats and rolls and strikes and kicks and grapples as they need to, we'll back you the whole way. This won't be over when lockdown restrictions ease. We think this is a genuine opportunity to now go back to the powers that be and raise serious questions about the way in which preferential services have been given to some organisations over others, and the way in which martial arts is grossly undervalued in the public eye and by government and Sport England as well. So you've done the worst of it, and I know that so many of you out there now will be feeling anxious and desperate and stressed by this. And I know so many of you have got businesses teetering on the edge of collapse, the community clubs struggling to retain members. Hold your head up, puff out your chest. We've got a couple more months to get through. We will get as many of you as we can over the next couple of weeks back into play on some sort of contact basis. For all the rest of you, if you need help, and I'm talking whether you need financial help affording your insurance bills, you need technical help understanding what the guidance means to you, or even if you need mental health yourself, so you need help, you just want to talk to somebody who understands it, pick up the phone and give us a call, or message us middle of the night on Facebook or live chat or whatever else. You are not in this alone. And whilst the last how many months have been appalling, the last year has been appalling for so many reasons, for so many people, the silver lining we have to take from this is lessons learned on the way regulation needs to look at martial arts and how we need to make sure our voice is heard. And we have stamped our feet, because all of you got behind a petition we did last week, we now have dialogue with Sport England on a number of matters, and recognition that we've now been approved onto that England Kickboxing return to play policy as well. So it is working. Have faith. The worst is behind us, and in the months ahead, we're going to all come out of this stronger than we went into it. We're going to capitalise on what we can gain from this in terms of the way we work with people like Sport England. And we have bagfuls of resources and tools, shiny new things we want to share with you guys that we've had sat on a shelf for the last, sometimes almost a year for some of it, that just haven't made sense or haven't been appropriate to share with you at that particular point in time. But we have held in reserve, and we will back you to the finish line. I'm going to ask my team to do a write-up of some of these questions that we're not going to get to today. We'll publish as much as we can on the website. We will keep publishing it all over the bank holiday weekend. We're going to make sure we're available to anyone who needs to speak with us. Do get in touch with us. Please bear with us if we take a few minutes longer, a few days longer than normal, getting back on certain queries. The situation is changing very, very rapidly, so keep your eyes on Facebook and whatnot, and Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn. We think Tuesday the 6th, we're going to get the guidance from DCMS, the update on the finer details. We may start to get answers on the who's been approved on policies. Please, 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 please. The final thing I want to ask you to try and take away from this is, I understand the knee-jerk reaction to jump ship, or not to jump ship because it's the wrong terminology, to just desperately find a solution to the problem right now. If you're a club that wants to desperately go back to contact training, and who doesn't, it's too easy to find any association right now that is saying, yep, we've got a return to play, off you go. And when this first broke, we were dumbfounded, but to say, well, how on earth there's so many of these associations, some of which are tin pot organisations, with offices above a chip shop. How have some of these organisations been approved and we can't even construct dialogue with Sport England? We have 30,000 members and 10 members of staff and officers and all the rest of it. What's going on? And it felt like a witch hunt initially, into a bit of digging revealed that actually none of the associations and self-proclaimed NGBs, and many of them were arbitrarily calling themselves NGBs, and of course they're not Sport England recognised, Sport Wales recognised, etc., have been creating their own policies and just throwing it out there and saying, there we go, return to play policy, we've approved it, off you go. It is a reprehensible misinterpretation of the rules set by DCMS in England. Sit tight, we will have more clarity to you in the days ahead. A massive thank you for bearing with me for the last half an hour of waffling. Hopefully it's given you a bit of context and some questions you've raised. Keep asking questions. We will do our best to point you towards the right answers. As always, we won't answer questions until we actually have something to hang our hat on for where that guidance has come from. So if we are silent on some matters, don't think we've forgotten or ignored it. We're just going to wait until we can give you something we can back up and that you can actually hang your hat on if an enforcement officer knocked on your door. So heads up, chin up, and we'll be back in touch shortly.